Good evening. Welcome. Welcome to the Allen County Public Library's Theater. I'm Kurt Witcher, the Director of Special Collections for the library, and gosh, what a great way to start Family History Month. If you didn't know it was Family History Month, every October since I think the late 1990s, October is designated as Family History Month, and what an awesome program to have as the very first program of Family History Month. So in our program booklet, this program is mentioned on page 2 and on page 3. So if you want a souvenir of this awesome talk we're going to hear tonight, feel free to pick one of these up on your way out if you didn't pick one up on the way in. This program, we are so blessed to have a researcher, a filmmaker, a writer, an expert with us this evening. But we're also very fortunate to have a friend to the library, a friend to genealogy, a friend to history, and a friend to this community. And so I'd like to introduce Kathy Carrier, who has really been a driving force for years in honoring Bill Blass and honoring everything about him and wanting us and our descendants to remember great things about Fort Wayne. Sometimes I think we suffer from the Rodney Dangerfield effect, right? Like Fort Wayne gets no respect. Like Fort Wayne, what's in Fort Wayne? Why would this library be in Fort Wayne? Why are you in Fort Wayne? Oh my goodness, so many awesome things are in Fort Wayne, and Kathy Carrier has been an advocate for that. She's CEO of Brilliant. She does a lot of consulting and a lot of business in the community, and I think she doesn't recognize that I have dibs on the 25th hour of the day. I think she's using some of my 25th hours of the day. That's how she gets everything done. So please join me in welcoming Kathy Carrier.
Good evening. We're so glad you're here to enjoy Rick Beyer's talk and learn just a little bit about Bill Blass. So during COVID, I was given a book with some fashion pictures of Bill Blass, and I chopped it up, frankly, and made greeting cards out of those beautiful pictures. And I became curious about Bill and realized that Bill Blass is from Fort Wayne, Indiana, where I'm from, where we are today. I had kind of no idea about that. My mom and dad sort of knew Bill Blass's clothes, and I remembered that, but I became curious about that because I realized that a very famous fashion designer was from Fort Wayne, Indiana. And I wandered over to the History Center, and Todd Pelfrey said, well, heck, he was also in the Ghost Army. I had never heard of the Ghost Army. I didn't know what it was. And when I realized that our entrepreneurial fashion designer was also a World War II hero from the Ghost Army, I thought, we have to tell this story. This is a Fort Wayne native that people need to know about. So I started to ask people, have you heard about Bill Blass? No one knew who he was. No one had heard of the Ghost Army, and no one had put all that together. So to me, he is a hero. I'm curious about all of that because my father, who is deceased, was also a World War II veteran. I grew up as a Marine, a very proud Marine's daughter. And my father fought in the Pacific, saw a lot of action. In fact, we're putting together a book about his life. We're very proud of him. So to me, to honor Bill Blass is something that we should do as Fort Wayne people. And personally, I love doing this because it reminds me of my father. There's a gaggle of kids in the back. They are my grandchildren. My son is here, Mike. He is an Army veteran. I'm very proud of his service in the Special Forces. So to me, this is a personal thing, which is why I'm really glad you're here. We have some dignitaries here tonight. We actually, for the first time since we started all this Bill Blass stuff 4 or 5 years ago, we have a member of the Bill Blass family here. His niece, Barbara Camp, has joined us tonight. We're so excited she's here in town. It's big. Woo, woo, woo. Yeah, we're really excited about it. I'm joined by our board members. There's a board, nonprofit, Bill Blass Legacy. Teresa Walker's here, Linda Wiss is here, Kay Hageman's here, and they join me as board members of Bill Blass Legacy. So here we are at the Allen County Public Library, and you know, I knew Kurt Witcher, and I knew Kurt Witcher was a genealogist of epic proportions. But when I went to his office with the Bill Blass story and asked 3 or 4 years ago how the library could be involved, he kind of shook his head and he said to me, well, you know, all these 100 days, Bill turned 100 3 years ago, so we had a 100-day party honoring Bill Blass's 100th birthday, and then Kurt said, you know, all that's going to end, and then what are you going to have? And I said, well, I don't know. I don't know. He said, well, why don't we do an online archive, a community album that's electronic that will last forever? Gee, what an idea. So, Kurt, I'm so grateful that you gave me that advice. Together with the board, we hired a gal that helped us scan. There's a wonderful, wonderful archive about Bill's life in Fort Wayne as a Southside student, as a child here. There's a whole bunch of content around his fashion career, his 50-year fashion career in our electronic archive. And there's a lot of rich content about the Ghost Army and his role there. So if you haven't checked it out, it's in the community albums section of the Allen County Public Library website. We're really proud of that. We continue to add content. So I see Brian Williamson is here. He's our curator for our exhibit at the Fort Wayne Museum of Art. Brian, we're so glad you're here. It is there until October 26th, so if you haven't gone through, you should. If you're a veteran or a family of military, you can get in anytime for free. If you're not a military folk, you can go on Thursday nights from 5 to 8 for free. So anyhow, okay, here we are. You're here to not listen to me, but to listen to Rick Beyer. We tracked Rick down. I think Linda Wiss actually did. Early in our research about Bill Blass's life, and realized there was an organization called Ghost Army Legacy. And what a legacy it is. There is a complete history. I can't even begin to tell you what all they've done to research, document, and meet Ghost Army people. Rick began his work when many of them were still alive, so he met them and recorded them. It's just so amazing. So we asked him to be involved in our activities 3 years ago, and he has been, and he's back now tonight and tomorrow night to be here with all of us. We're really grateful that he's here. I have to also thank Marilyn, who is his wife. Marilyn Ray Shearer is also here with him. I just think she's pretty cool. She runs a radio show that's focused on folk music in Chicago on Saturday nights. It's amazing, the Midnight Special. Anyhow. Okay, so I don't think I want to introduce Rick. I asked a special friend of Rick's to introduce him. Rick, I'm so pumped about this. Play the clip, please.
Hi, my name is Casey Navarro. I'm a senior here at Southside High School. Currently, we're standing in the World War II Memorial here at Southside High School with over 2,200 names of people who served in World War II. One of them being Bill Blass, who I would know nothing about if it wasn't for the work of Rick Beyer. It all started my freshman year when I was given the opportunity to sit in and listen to Rick Beyer tell the story of the Ghost Army. The story just kind of sat with me, inspired me, and from that, I took that, and going into my junior year, I decided that I was going to investigate and write a paper on the Ghost Army because of this inspiration from Rick Beyer. Now going into my senior year, I'm nothing but grateful for the opportunity to be able to sit down and interview Rick Beyer on October 3rd here at Southside High School. So I can't thank Rick Beyer enough for the opportunity, and I can't thank Kathy for enough to be the connection and give me this opportunity. One of the biggest accomplishments of this story was Rick Beyer, his hard work to really get this Congressional Gold Medal for the group of the Ghost Army. And I'm so grateful for Kathy to be able to give us 2 of these replicas. So I just can't thank those 2 enough, and I just want to let you know that this is a very interesting story, and I just want you to relax and just listen to what Rick Beyer has to say, because if it inspired me, I know it's going to inspire all of you.
You guys inspired yet? Okay. I am after that. It is my pleasure to kick off Family History Month here at the Allen County Public Library. Thanks to Kurt Witcher. Thanks so much, Kathy Carrier. Thanks to Kasem, who I'm going to see on Friday. Really delighted to be here tonight. I have spent 20 years researching and telling the story of the Ghost Army. And no, these World War II soldiers were not members of my family, but after 20 years, you start to feel like they're members of my family. And I was thinking about this because I've been to their homes. I have met with them. I've met with their children and their grandchildren. I have had dinner with them. I have attended their funerals, traveled abroad with them. So I know these folks very well. And just last week, I was able to visit 102-year-old veteran Bernie Bluestein, 102 there and looking pretty good. He just moved into a nursing home, and he was telling me about his honeymoon so many years ago, how he jitterbugged with his new wife wearing a dark blue zoot suit. And I thought, wow, I so wish I had a photograph of that. So what I came here to do today is to share with you some personal reflections on my 20-year journey chasing ghosts, and look for lessons it may hold to any of you who are trying to research or tell the story of a family member or some other story from history that you want people to know about. And in my case, this journey led first to a film, then to a New York Times best-selling book, and eventually, as you heard, to a Congressional Gold Medal for the Ghost Army. But I could foresee very little of that when I got started. Now, before I get down into the weeds on this story, I'm betting that most of you know what the Ghost Army is, that maybe you've seen the film or the book, or you've been able to see the exhibit at the Art Museum. But there might be somebody in the audience who's saying, I'm sorry, Ghost Army? Rick, what are you talking about? So I thought I would play you a video, and it's actually the original trailer for my documentary film, just to give you a thumbnail of the story.
A little bundle of stuff, all compressed before you opened the bundle, spread the nozzles around, and inflated it.
The artillery piece was good, but that M4 tank, that was the beauty. That was the piece of work.
Back of my half-track, I tell my children, was the biggest boombox you ever saw, but it played sounds of tanks and activity.
They had recordings of building a pontoon bridge or any type of bridge, and you could hear them hammering away and swearing. And
we were turned loose in town. Go to the pub, order some omelets, and talk loose.
To be in the middle of this incredible adventure with the world at war in a foreign country, I just had to put it down.
We were sleeping in hedgerows and foxholes, but nothing kept us away from going someplace to do a watercolor.
moved on up into this last grand deception.
And there was nothing between us but our hopes and prayers that separated us from the Panzer Division.
They're 300 yards, they're 200 yards, and suddenly you realize that's the enemy.
I used to refer to us as the Cecil B. DeMille Warriors.
My Ghost Army story began at a Starbucks in Lexington, Massachusetts 20 years ago. 20 years. I was not quite as gray then as I am now. And in January of 2005, I met a woman there named Martha Gavin, and her uncle, John Jarvie, was in the Ghost Army. He's the one who was talking about sleeping in hedgerows and foxholes in that video. And a friend of mine had contacted me. He said, oh, I'm serving on the board with this woman, Martha, and her uncle was in this crazy World War II unit, and she thinks somebody should make a documentary about it. Would you meet with her? And in what was possibly the best decision of my life, aside from agreeing to marry Marilyn, I said sure. And I'll never forget, it was a cold winter's day, the fireplace was going, I got there first, and she walked in carrying an armload of red 3-ring binders. And these, it turned out, contained her uncle's wartime scrapbooks filled with photos, documents, and artworks, because he was one of the artists who served in this unit. And these are some of the artworks that were in his scrapbooks that I saw that day. And this is how so many family history journeys begin, right? With an artifact, a story, and a person who is passionate about finding out more. And so on this first day that I was focused on this project, I was learning not only about the deception mission, but the fact that there had been many artists in this unit, which offered a twin aspect to the story. And some of those artworks that I saw on the very first day of working on the Ghost Army are on display now at the Fort Wayne Museum of Art as part of the Ghost Army exhibit. Now, at that point, I had been making films for the History Channel for about 8 years. So I had I knew exactly how this was going to work. I was going to pitch this to them. They were going to say, yes, great story, we'd love to do it. I would work for 6 to 9 months. They'd give me a couple of $100,000, and then I would move on to something else. And I literally had no expectation other than that. Well, I pitched it, and they were not interested, okay? Which might seem odd, but at the time, people had called them the Hitler Channel. They were moving away from some of the documentary programming, the World War II programming that they had done, and they were completely turned off about the idea of doing a documentary that art would somehow be part of. They said, well, that won't interest our male audience. So I'm assuming that all of you guys are now asleep because I'm talking about art here. So eventually I decided to make this as an independent film and raise the money myself. And I said those very dangerous words, how hard can it be? I was 49 years old, do the math, I'm 69 now, with a daughter about to start college, a son in high school, and 2 cats, okay? This is me at the time with one of those cats. I had never made a film that wasn't commissioned by the History Channel. I had never raised money for a project myself. I didn't know anyone at PBS or National Geographic or any other network. So what gave me the confidence to go forward and make the leap? And the answer is the story. This is one of the richest and most compelling pieces of narrative material I have ever come across. It's deception, it's World War II, it's technology, it's art, it's performance, it's humor, it's tragedy. And I was convinced that it would make a great film. And I was equally convinced that if I could just raise the money to make that film, somebody would want to see it, somebody would want to run it. And I'd heard at the time that the average length of time to make an independent film was 7 years. But somehow, I assumed that didn't apply to me, which I think is what every documentary filmmaker thinks when they start out. And it was a useful piece of self-deception, because if I had known that it was going to, in fact, take 8 years to make that documentary, I might have walked away right at the start. Well, the first thing I realized I had to do to make a film was to raise money. And I worked to try every imaginable method of fundraising, both in the 8 years I worked on the film and honestly ever since then with the Ghost Army Legacy Project, which we founded to honor and preserve the legacy of this unit. You guys are lucky that I'm not raising money today, you know, because I'd be working on it. But I have asked friends for money. I have held Kickstarter campaigns, fundraising parties, screening fundraisers, year-end drives, Facebook pitches, everything I could think of. And almost all the funding for this film came from individuals. So we raised $300,000 to make the film, which I have to tell you was doing it on a bare bones budget. And $290,000 out of that amount came from individual people writing a check. So that's pretty awesome, and I really appreciate. Thank you. And they deserve the applause, but it was pretty incredible. And the biggest thing I learned about successful fundraising is that it's actually not about begging for money. It's about sharing your excitement for a project, because excitement is contagious. If you can capture what got you excited, and you can get someone else excited, and then they will want to be a donor to the project. And that person, if you get somebody excited that way and grateful for the chance to donate, they will donate again and again and again. So, okay, so I started raising money. When I had enough money to get started, I went on to filmmaking. And the first thing I sought to do was to interview as many of these veterans as quickly as I could while their minds were still sharp. And most of these soldiers were already in their 80s. And normally, making a film, I would try to do all of my research before interviewing anybody. But in this case, I thought, I want to get them as quickly as possible because memories fade sometimes. And so I did the initial interviews in September of 2005, more interviews then coming up in 2006. And the road trips to do these interviews were a joy. I mean, many of these guys had buried this story deep down for decades because this unit was top secret. They left the war and were told, don't talk about these deception missions that we carried out during the war. And so now they were eager to talk. And it was so fresh for them because many of them hadn't been telling and retelling their war stories over the years. So it was like brand new. And sometimes when they got lost in a story, I think they forgot the camera was even there. We had an interview we did with John Jarvie, who if you're holding on to every name here, you know he's the guy whose niece introduced me to the story. But it was nighttime, and we were sitting in this hotel room in Washington, and we were talking to him, and we had his scrapbooks, and we would place his scrapbooks on his knees. They're just out of sight for the camera. And I would point to a picture and say, John, what's going on in this painting that you painted during the war? And it was like suddenly he was traveling back in time. It was really extraordinary. A number of veterans were uncertain that what they had done in the war really mattered. Several of them said, do you think we made a difference? And it's sad to me, with all the research I've done, I know they did make a difference in World War II. And it's sad to me that many of them went to their graves not really being aware of that. Every time I watch the film, I think about the guys who I interviewed. Some of those people I talked to for 30 or 45 minutes and never met again. And some, as I've said, I got to know really well, became friends, visited them at home, and knew them quite for years. But I feel a powerful closeness to every one of them. So, okay, so that's the filmmaking. And then let's go to research. Because research, if you're interested in family history, that's pretty important. If you're dealing with an Army unit, the National Archives is a great place to start. The National Archives in College Park, Maryland, has most of the records of the unit histories and such of the U.S. Army. And most Army units generate a huge amount of paperwork. But this was a secret unit, so virtually all of the records of the 23rd fit into those 3 boxes. And I've gone through them several times and likely will do so again. And probably the most important item in those 3 boxes is the official history of the unit, written in the fall of 1945 by Captain Fred Fox. And it provides a roadmap for the story. Everybody who's written about it has used this. We've actually now reproduced the entire document on our website, ghostarmy.org, so you can read the kind of first-person resource that has been the origin of so much writing about this unit. And at the National Archives, I also found this footage related to sonic deception, which I was able to incorporate into the film. This is them recording the sounds and then mixing them onto a wire. The predecessor of the tape recorder is the wire recorder. And so I was able to incorporate that into the film. And I did a lot of other research as well. On a project like this, you're always looking for some diamond that another prospector has missed. And I'll tell you one research story. I was looking around on the web, I guess, or maybe it was, sometimes you look in the footnotes of another book and say, oh, they got their material from here. Maybe I can look at that source. And I realized that the papers of a man named Ralph Ingersoll were a few miles from where I lived. And Ralph Ingersoll was an interesting guy. Before the war, he was a flamboyant, left-wing celebrity author. The New York Times described him as a prodigiously energetic egotist. He was the publisher of Fortune. He was the general manager of Time. He started his own newspaper, PM. And he's closely connected with this story because in 1943, he was a staff officer working on deception plans in London. And a fellow officer once said, I've never met anyone who was such a bright guy, who was such a goddamn liar. What a great pedigree for a deception officer, right? You're a bright guy who's a good liar. But I'd seen snippets in other books that Ingersoll might have been involved in creating the unit. But there wasn't any hard evidence, and at least one of the authors who'd already written about the unit was completely, he's saying, no, Ingersoll wasn't really involved at all. So I thought, well, I'll go to Boston Library and I'll look at Boston University Library. I'll look at his papers. And I went to the library and I consulted a finding aid and saw there was a box with a manuscript of an unpublished memoir. So I ordered that box, it came out, piles and piles of typescripts in there. I started going through them and I found it. In the memoir, written long before anybody had written a book about the Ghost Army, long before it was public knowledge, he claimed credit for creating it. He wrote, my prescription was for a battalion that could imitate a whole corps of either armor or infantry, a super secret battalion of specialists in the art of manipulating our antagonists' decisions. And he referred to the unit as my con artists and said its creation was, quote, my only original contribution to my country's armed forces. And wow, this was such an exciting find. And it was even more exciting because I had read a biography of Ralph Ingersoll by a man named Roy Hoops. And he hadn't mentioned the Ghost Army in there at all. And I know that he looked at these manuscripts because he referenced them in his footnotes. But I think he didn't understand what Ingersoll was talking about. So part of the deal always is when you're looking at source material, it's good to have some kind of understanding that you bring to it because you may then glean things from this source material that nobody else can find. And that's the kind of thing that, keeps a researcher going. You keep at it, and sometimes you find gold. So, okay, interviewing people, doing research, making the film. Let's talk about the road to PBS. So the film took 8 years to make. Well, why did it take 8 years? I had to raise the money, shoot the interviews, do the research, edit the film, then convince the network to run it. The entire time, I'm also doing other projects to bring in money to put food on the table and pay the rent, and it took time. And from the very beginning, I thought, well, this would be a great film for PBS. I saw PBS as the natural home for it, and I thought it would fit perfectly as a PBS American experience. And I met with one of the producers of that show, and she said, well, we can't even consider this until you have a rough cut. So by March of 2010, right now I'm 5 years into the project, I had a rough cut of the film, and I agreed actually to screen it at the University of Michigan, where they were hosting the first Ghost Army exhibit, long before the one that is now at the Museum of Art. And I remember it was a St. Patrick's Day. And the people at the library where they were putting on this screening, they said, well, we'll probably get 50, 75 people. We got 300. 300. And the buildings and grounds guys kept going downstairs to find more chairs. And people were coming in, and students were on the phone calling other students saying, you should come see this. This is really good. And I was standing in the back with my head down because I was so nervous about whether anyone was going to like this film or not. I probably shouldn't have worried. So they liked the rough cut. So, okay, I've got a rough cut, and I've displayed it, and people like it. And I thought, okay, I'm going to ask my old executive producer at the History Channel, Susan Werby, for feedback. Now, she'd said they weren't interested in the film, and I said, okay, but you're knowledgeable as an executive producer. You can tell me what you think of this film. And, of course, secretly, I thought, once she sees it, well, I mean, 300 people in Ann Arbor loved it. She's going to love it, too. And when we talked, she did not love it. It felt flat to her, which was, ouch, that hurt. And then she said the phrase that has remained burned in my memory ever since. She called it visually stultifying. Visually stultifying. Do you have any idea how painful it is to hear that? I was completely dismayed and disheartened. I told Marilyn about it. She quickly got very angry at Susan. I think she's still angry at Susan today. I was hurt, depressed, down in the dumps. This was a knife to the stomach. It was the harshest single piece of feedback I have ever gotten in my entire career as a filmmaker or a writer. It was also the most valuable piece of feedback I've ever gotten in my career. Because it turns out it's really hard to get people to tell you what they think. They really want to tell you something positive. It's great. It looks great, Rick. It's very exciting. And here was Susan, who did me the favor of being brutally honest. And the film was built around all sorts of photographs that came from Ghost Army veterans. And I was proud of the fact that it was really authentic to their source material. And I hadn't thought about the possibility that it might simply make it boring, okay, visually. So I determined that I would go back to the National Archives as many times as possible, and I would replace as much of the stills with footage as I could, and I would find color footage and replace as much of the black and white footage with color footage as I could. And I did that, and it made it a much better film. And I have thanked Susan, although I still have a little bit of an issue with visually stultifying. But okay, so a year later, now it's 2011, I send this film in to American Experience, and I wait to hear back from them. I'm still waiting, by the way, because they didn't respond, and I couldn't get them to respond. Even though I knew some of those people, they just were completely non-responsive. And their non-responsive did leave a sour taste in my mouth. And they just shut down American Experience because of budget cuts. And I feel bad because it was a great program, but a little part of me was like, aha, you finally got it. But I also sent it to a bunch of other people, National Geographic Channel, Discovery Military, Smithsonian, ZDF in Germany. Nothing happened with any of them. So by 2012, the film was nearly done, but I had no home for it. I was prepared at this point to put the DVDs in my car and drive around the country and sell them out of the trunk. And then something magical happened. We needed a hero, and we found one. And his name was Charles Schuerhoff, and he ran PBS's international sales. And he had originally been interested in the film, and I'd sent him a rough cut, and then he said, oh, no, it's not really for us. But he'd always kept in touch with me, and would say, what's the progress, what's going on? And then in 2012, I got an email from somebody else at PBS, Amy Letourneau, in PBS International Marketing. And she said, oh, can I see a copy of your film? And I was getting pretty close to being done, so I sent her a copy. Well, she sent Charles a copy. I sent her 2 copies. She sent Charles a copy. He called me back, and suddenly he said, this is very different than what I saw a few years ago. This I can sell, or words to that effect. He said, who are you talking to at PBS? And he promptly put me on to the vice president of general audience programming, and a couple of weeks later, we were in discussions about them running the film, which they eventually did. That was it. The Ghost Army was on the way to its final premiere. And when I look back at the entire Ghost Army story, it feels like everything just naturally fell into place. But you know, that's just hindsight. It could have been completely different. If Amy hadn't called me, if Charles hadn't pushed me to send it in, everything might have disappeared. So anyway, we had a premiere. Before it aired on PBS, we had an official premiere in Massachusetts at the Salem Film Festival in March of 2013. And it was a whiteout blizzard outside, but somehow everybody showed up. We had a full house inside with 3 veterans present, including John Jarvie. And his niece Martha Gavin was there. And the film premiered on PBS. There's John and Martha, his niece. The film premiered on PBS in May of 2013. And I'm here with my friends who are also all major donors, showing off some of the great media coverage we got. And my favorite was a TV Guide article that described the film as Argo meets Der Fuhrer. So, and I remember watching it that night and thinking, well, okay, I've been working on this for 8 years. Finally, I'm done. And I had no idea that it was going to keep going. So I want to jump forward to 2015, throwing a lot of dates at you, but that's 2 years after the film premieres. And 3 things happened that month that took the Ghost Army into new directions. The book came out. We started the effort to convince Congress to award the Congressional Gold Medal, and Hollywood came calling. So I want to tell you about all these. And first of all, the book. I had almost nothing to do with the book deal. That came about because of Liz Sayles. Liz was an illustrator. Her father, Bill Sayles, was in the Ghost Army. We had connected through one of the early screenings of The Rough Cut. Liz and I started working on early Ghost Army exhibits together. And she ended up meeting somebody from Princeton Architectural Press at some sort of party and said, oh, well, we're looking for somebody to publish a Ghost Army book. And they said, really? We were just talking about that at a meeting the other day, and we want to publish a Ghost Army book. So it just came together through Liz. So we decided to do it together. And we had a book party in 2015 for the launch of that book. We had 5 veterans there. I think they've all passed away since then, I'm sad to say. Gil Seltzer, the man who's standing next to me on the far right, I think he was 102 when we had that party. He lived to be 106. And so we got the book out. And it's done very well. It's still doing well. We have some here tonight, but I'll let Kathy talk to you about that when I'm done. Sadly, Liz passed away in 2021, and she was a great partner. She had a no-nonsense manner. She had a wicked sense of humor. She was somebody who would call you out, even if it meant calling bullshit on you, which she did on me a few times. And I miss her dearly. And so we did an updated version of the book that came out in 2023. And when that came out, I wanted to call Liz and tell her about it. And of course, I couldn't do that. But I think she would be proud of it, too. So, okay, that's the book. The movie, okay? I know, probably the movie. That's the story you might want to hear. I think almost anybody who researches a historical book and then writes about it dreams of Hollywood calling. Well, it happened to me, and it was a Friday. It was on Friday the 13th of February 2014. Friday the 13th, that should have been a clue. And a man named Andrew Lazar, who said he was a movie producer in Hollywood, left me a message saying he wanted to talk about optioning the movie rights for the book and the documentary. Now, this was not the first call from Hollywood I'd received. It was about the 20th. I had gotten calls from agents and directors and producers and writers, but none of them had led anywhere, so I was very blasé. But before returning the call, I decided to look up Andrew Lazar on Google and see what I could find out about him. And I discovered that he was one of the producers of American Sniper, the highest grossing war movie of all time. That got my attention. That he was currently up for an Academy Award for the same movie. That got my attention. That he had produced 15 other movies, including Space Cowboys with Clint Eastwood and 10 Things I Hate About You, and now he really had my attention. And I returned his call very quickly. And when I did, we had a great conversation, and he used a phrase that I've never forgotten. He said, "I can't imagine a world where I don't want to make this movie." And maybe he says that to all the girls, but I sure fell for it. So that started us down the road. He optioned the rights. He brought Universal Studios on board. Henry Gayden wrote the screenplay. A second version of the screenplay was written by Nick Pizzolatto. You may know him as the creator of True Detective. He got Ben Affleck to sign on to star and direct the film. Marilyn and I met with Ben Affleck in March 2019 at Ben's production company in Santa Monica. And we were waiting for him to come into the meeting. We were sitting there with Andrew Lazar and a couple of other people. And we were looking at the window of the conference room, and a big car pulls into the parking lot, a black 1969 Cadillac Coupe de Ville. It pulled right up to the window. If it had come any closer, it would have been in the conference room. And it had Massachusetts license plate with a Red Sox logo and the letters RS1. And one of Ben Affleck's producers says, "Here comes Ben in his Batmobile." And Ben was charming, and he seemed quite taken with the story, and he asked lots of questions, and he wrote down everything I said, which is extremely flattering, and I highly recommend that to you as a strategy if you're meeting with somebody and trying to get them to think that you really like what they're saying. He pressed us for anecdotes, ideas, impressions, mildly scribbled, and at the end of the meeting, we said something about how excited we were and that we truly hoped that this would happen. And Ben looked at us and he said, "Oh, it's happening. It's happening." So we walked out of that meeting sky high. And we were in Italy, it was a month later, when the news broke about this, because it had all been secret up to then. We couldn't tell anybody, that Ben Affleck was going to direct our movie. And it was late. We were in Italy. It was around 11:30 p.m., and we would come back from dinner. We were staying with friends at this villa, and I looked at my phone, and that's when I saw the headline, "Ben Affleck to star in and direct World War II caper, Ghost Army." We were so excited. We started screaming. Our friends came out of their rooms. "What's the matter? What's wrong?" We started telling them about it. My phone started to ring. People started calling us from across the country. It was all happening. And then, alas, it fell apart. As things do in Hollywood, it fell apart over money. I'll clue you in. Ben wanted Universal to budget $55 million for the film. And Universal said, "Nope, we're not going to give you more than $40 million to make this film." And I'm like, I don't know. Couldn't you compromise at 47? Okay. It doesn't seem that hard, but apparently not. And so that was the story of the Hollywood movie. We've had other inquiries since then, nothing terribly serious. Maybe that movie will get made someday. Maybe I'll be in the grave before it happens, but we can always hope. Finally, the third thing I wanted to talk about, and the one that was, I know it was mentioned in the notes for this, is the story of the gold medal. The Ghost Army was written out of history after World War II. It was so secret, it didn't get into any history books, which is why the people in this unit were never officially recognized for the 22 deceptions that they carried out on the battlefields of Europe. And in the fall of 2014, I began to think about how we could remedy that. And I very quickly zeroed in on the idea of a Congressional Gold Medal. And this medal is the highest honor Congress can bestow. The first one went to George Washington in 1776 for recovering Boston from the British. So that kind of set the standard for the gold medal. And something like 180 of them had been awarded over the years. And it seemed like a good fit. So some of them had been awarded to World War II units that had not been honored at the time for various reasons. So in early 2015, I once again said, Monuments Men had gotten a gold medal. I once again said, how hard can it be? Will I never learn? So let me just give you a sense of how daunting an endeavor this was. Any congressman or senator can introduce a bill, but only 3% of the bills introduced into Congress actually pass. And getting Congress to do anything, especially now that they're shut down, is difficult. But believe it or not, gold medal bills are even harder, because unlike all other legislation, a gold medal bill requires that 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate co-sponsor the bill before it can be considered. Which means before we even got a vote, we had to have 67 senators and 290 representatives to formally indicate that they supported the bill. So the other thing about it is that Congress exists in sessions, 2-year sessions. We started in the 114th Congress. When you get to the end of that 2-year session, the slate is set clean. You have to start all over again getting co-sponsors. Well, who would be crazy enough to take this on? And I guess the answer is somebody who just spent 8 years making a documentary. So we started our nonprofit, the Ghost Army Legacy Project, more fundraising. The bill was introduced in 2015 in Congress. This is the actual first version of the bill, introduced by Annie Custer from New Hampshire, who, not so coincidentally, was my college classmate at Dartmouth. It's always good to have friends. It was introduced the following spring in the Senate by Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts, and I started knocking on the doors of Congress. And it was slow going. My friend Roy Eichhorn, who I did a lot of this lobbying with, he was my lobbying partner from the beginning. His dad was in the unit. He put it into these words really well. He said, Congress is like 535 small businesses under one roof, each independently owned and operated, each with its own culture, customs, and ways of doing things. So we had to grind it out and approach each office one by one. People are like, well, they should all just say yes, right? They should just be excited about it and say yes. Well, they're all really busy. Each office is in a never-ending maelstrom of people coming through the door. Many of these people, despite what you see on the news, are quite serious about legislating, and therefore they want to research it before they sign on to anything, and that takes time, and they're very busy. And third, the decision to support a bill like this is not taken in a vacuum. For example, in any given year, there might be 40 gold medal bills pending in Congress, and maybe 2 of them are going to pass. So a discriminating congressperson is going to pick and choose which one they're going to support. So progress was slow, and I just want to take you back, just to kind of, for dramatic effect, to the lowest moment I had in this effort. It was Wednesday, November 15th, 2017. I'm really good with dates. 10:30 in the morning. And I sat in the basement of a Capitol Hill office building with a sinking heart as pessimism poured from the mouth of the person sitting across from me. And his name was Joe Pinder. And he had a long face with a hangdog expression. He was the epitome of a world-weary government bureaucrat. And the CEO of the National World War II Museum had said, you should talk to Joe Pinder. He's kind of like a gold medal guru. And I went in with high hopes. He was a staffer for the House Financial Services Committee. But the forecast I got from him was 100% doom and gloom. And he kept repeating the phrase, I don't want to discourage you, but but it's going to be nearly impossible. But all of the citizen lobbying in the world is only going to get you part of the way, unless you have some big guns behind you. But there are people in the House who are opposed to group gold medals as opposed to individual gold medals, and it'll probably block you even if you build widespread support. But. And I walked out of that meeting profoundly shaken. And I thought at that point about giving up. And I actually talked to the board members of my organization, the Ghost Army Legacy Project. And I said, maybe we should not go forward with this. We had some donors who were saying they didn't think that this was the best use of funds. And I was on the verge of letting things go. So why didn't I? Well, I guess first of all, is I really believed in these guys and what they had done. And I honestly didn't know how to go back to the veterans and their families and say, hey guys, I'm giving up. We'd gotten some organizations to support us, the American Legion, the World War II Museum. It kind of felt like we'd made some progress and that maybe, we shouldn't throw that away. And so I decided to pursue it for one more session. But we decided to change our strategy. And we decided we would put together a lobbying team of maybe 40 to 50 people to advocate for the Ghost Army. So we started out with just me and Roy and just a few people. But you might say, well, why didn't you start with 40 or 50 people to begin with? Well, we really didn't know anything about what we were doing. The thing is that now we knew enough to actually train people. We were blooded. We could tell them what to expect and how to handle it. And we brought a group of people, this is some of them, to Washington, D.C. in October 2019, where we had 30 meetings set up on the Hill. And one of the staffers for Annie Custer also said to us when we were coming in for this trip, he said, maybe we should do an ice cream social. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what? He said, well, Congress is not in session. You're going to be here when Congress is not in session, so the congressmen are all away. The staffers might like to come to an ice cream social. And it sounds so sort of 1920s to me, an ice cream social. But I said, okay, we can do that, even though who's going to come to an ice cream social on a Wednesday afternoon in October? So we expected to get 60 staffers. We ordered ice cream for 75. We got 120. The ice cream social turned out to be very popular. We actually ran out of ice cream. We got them to bring some more. We'd run out of plastic spoons. So I was in the kitchen, in the bathroom. Should I tell this story? Rinsing off plastic spoons and drying them with a paper towel. Then we brought them back out as if they were clean. I don't think anybody got sick. So this was a turning point. We started adding co-sponsors. We made a second trip in February 2020. We had 60 to 80 meetings. We started making progress. And the fundamentals of the bill hadn't changed, but our mastery of the process had. And in the spring of 2021, we finally hit 290 in the House. The Senate, the Senate passed it early the following year. And in the end, the president signed the bill into law in February of 2022. And so we had to make our case on the merits to 350 congressmen and senators. And people had told us, like Joe Pinder, I'm still irritated with, that it couldn't be done. And many of those same people marveled afterwards that we did it without heavyweight support from congressional leaders or leaders at the Pentagon. And I still marvel at it. So gold medals are custom designed, which is one reason the design process takes 2 years. We worked very closely with the Mint on this process, giving them a creative brief, and then reviewing designs and settling on what we liked. And this is what the medal looks like, the front and the back. And the gold medal was officially awarded in last year, March of 2024. And 600 people, many of them family members, gathered at Emancipation Hall at the Capitol to take part in a ceremony presided over by Speaker of the House Mike Johnson. We had 3 Ghost Army veterans who were able to attend, along with the leadership of the U.S. Congress and the U.S. military. And this was something that I had worked towards for so many years, it made it a deeply moving day.
We gather today to pay homage and to honor the legacy of a group of covert, creative, and courageous American war heroes who guarded truth and our precious troops with righteous deception.
When our troops were near, this group made the enemy believe they were far away, and when we were small, they made the enemy believe we were much larger.
A story of commitment and resolve, bravery and devotion, and remarkable talent and ingenuity.
These secret soldiers were innovators, and they played a decisive role in turning the tide and winning the war.
At great personal risk, these soldiers successfully diverted enemy resources and, as we have heard today, saved tens of thousands of American lives.
So my colleagues and I introduced the legislation to recognize and honor the Ghost Army with colleagues from both sides of the aisle and from both chambers. And that same bipartisanship is here today. It's no small feat to get all these congressional leaders in this room together, smiling and in agreement. It's like a political's Haley Comet. But the heroes of the Ghost Army and their families are used to defying their surroundings for the sake of making history.
So I want to tell you about one other thing from that day, and it's one other picture. It's this photograph, which I find very, very meaningful. And I took this picture in a holding room a few minutes before the gold medal ceremony. And the three Ghost Army veterans are seated from left to right: John Christman, Bernie Bluestein, and Seymour Nussenbaum. And kneeling on the ground and giving these veterans their undivided attention are, left to right, General Charles Brown, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Christine Wormuth, Secretary of the U.S. Army, and General Randy George, Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army. And I found this to be just an incredible moment. You know, there were a lot of politicians in this room as well. Mitch McConnell was there. Mike Johnson was there. You can see Annie Custer in this picture. They were talking to these veterans as well, but none of them got down on their knees to be face-to-face with them. And that recognition that was offered by those soldiers was one of the most powerful parts of the day for me. So, you know, look, our efforts continue. The Ghost Army Legacy Project is actually about to launch a new initiative, which we're not quite ready to introduce yet, but we're going to be offering grants to scholars for doing Ghost Army research projects. So we are still trying to find ways to spread this story around and tell more people about it. And as I reflect about 20 years of researching and telling people about the Ghost Army, I think that I would just say to anybody who's doing research of this type that you need to follow up every lead, you need to be open to every opportunity, and you need to be patient and persistent, because once you start digging, you never know what you will discover. I got to tell you, on the day that I met with Martha Gavin in the Starbucks in Lexington 20 years ago, I could never have seen us standing in Congress with 600 people and the leadership there, and so the journey may take you to unexpected places. I hope the story of the Ghost Army is remembered forever. I realize I didn't talk a lot about the unit itself today, and I'm happy to answer any questions if people have them. My promise to the veterans and their families and to all of you is that I am doing everything I can to make sure this story is remembered forever. Thank you so much. Thank you. Now, Kurt, we have time for questions, right?
If you're willing, absolutely.
Well, I'm willing.
Rick's been very generous in saying that
I'll stand here forever.
answer some questions. So I will bring the microphone to anyone who has a question.
So raise your hand if you have a question. Oh, somebody's got to have a question. All right. Somebody's got to be first in every crowd. I'm glad you're here.
So was this battalion made up of just regular Army staff that happened to include artists and creative types, or did they recruit people to be in this battalion that were the more, include a lot of creative types?
So what I call the Ghost Army, and other people call the Ghost Army, the official name of it was the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. It was 1,100 men. Capable of impersonating essentially 2 divisions, up to about 30,000 people. The Army put together the unit in early 1944. They basically selected other units and put them together to make the Ghost Army. But for example, to carry out the visual deception with inflatable tanks, inflatable artillery, inflatable trucks, they got a camouflage unit. And the camouflage unit had a lot of artists in it. About 40% of the camouflage unit were artists. So that's why all these artists ended up in the unit. To do the radio deception, they picked a signal unit, and then they got rid of about 100 people from the signal unit who they didn't need because they weren't going to be useful in carrying out the deceptions, and then they handpicked about 100 other people to bring in there. So, but there were also people in this unit who were regular, they were truck drivers, they were policemen, there were people who'd been drafted. So it's kind of a mix of people who had skills that had ended up being in a unit then the Army brought them into this unit. But it's also people who just kind of were filling a hole because they needed a body there. So it's a little bit of both.
How did they know this might work, or how did they get the idea that it was worth trying this?
Oh, so the idea, I mentioned Ralph Ingersoll. So, Ralph Ingersoll was working in London in 1944 for the Special Plans Branch of the U.S. Army, invasion force, and his boss there was a guy named Colonel Billy Harris. They were 2 really opposite people. Billy Harris was kind of a button-down U.S. Army colonel who'd gone to West Point. His whole family were West Pointers. Ralph Ingersoll is this kind of wild-eyed left-wing journalist and author. But they're working together to try to give the Allies every advantage they can once they cross the English Channel and go into France. And Ingersoll says, Ingersoll has been in North Africa. He's seen the deceptions the British have been carrying out in North Africa. And so he brings this idea up. He's got this grand idea. Billy Harris then says, okay, well, what do we need to do to make this work with the U.S. Army? And so it's the 2 of them together, make it happen and create it.
Thank you so much. I went to the art museum. I had no idea what the Ghost Army was, and now I'm on fire about it. So I'll help you spread the word.
You and me both, right?
How did Bill Blass enter into this battalion? Was he in the Army already, or what's the backstory there? Thank you.
So Bill Blass had ended up, as did many other artists, in the 603rd Camouflage Engineers. I don't know exactly how Bill had gotten there. He was in New York City already. He was already involved in trying to sell his fashion designs. A number of art schools in both New York and the rest of the country kind of had a pipeline into the camouflage units in the U.S. Army. So I think somehow from that he ends up being in the 603rd. The other soldiers who worked with Bill, Jack Macy said that Bill Blass read Vogue in his foxhole, which I just think is one of the great descriptive lines of all time. One of the soldiers said, I don't know if this is true, I recount, I don't know if it's true, said that Bill took apart his uniform and then put it back together again so that he had the best tailored uniform in the U.S. Army. Now, I talked to somebody else who knew Bill Blass, who said, Bill Blass couldn't sew, he always had somebody else do that. So I don't know, Barbara. Maybe you know, if somebody can ask you about it afterwards. But so he's in there in the 603rd, as is, by the way, Ellsworth Kelly, the famous minimalist painter and sculptor now, but just a young art student then. Arthur Singer, who became a famous wildlife artist. Art Kane, who later took the famous picture of all the musicians, on the jazz musicians on the stoop in Harlem in 1957. So you had a lot of young talent in this unit, and they're all together. So they're all encouraging each other, and they're holding art shows for each other in their spare time, while they're then also deceiving the Germans on the battlefields of Europe. So it really is one of those stories that when you dive into it, the deeper you go, the more unbelievable it becomes. And when I was starting this project early on, and I was speaking to, you know, Masons groups and anybody I could get in front of to try to tell them about this, people would sometimes stop me as I was making a presentation and say, well, wait a minute, is this a novel you're writing? And I'd be like, no, this really happened. And I had one guy, it was actually at the Perkins School for the Blind. It was people who were coming in for a day program. These were older people who'd gone blind. And I was making a presentation, and this guy came in early and he said, I don't believe a word of this. I was in Patton's Third Army. I was in the anti-aircraft, and I never heard about this. I asked my friends about it. They'd never heard about it. And I said, well, sir, I understand your skepticism, but if you can wait for my presentation, I'd appreciate it. And so I did my presentation, and I played my video that had some of these soldiers talking about it, and I talked about what they did. And he came up to me afterward going, this is the most amazing story I've ever seen. I'm calling my friends tonight about it. We're going to spread the word. So, you know, it did take some effort to get people to believe it really happened.
Was there a certain amount of time that had to pass before the servicemen could talk about what they were doing?
Yeah, so my understanding and is that it was 50 years, and so it was in the mid-90s, really 1996, that it was declassified. Now, I have never seen anything in writing that confirms that. And I've talked to people who said, oh yeah, I got that in my files, I can dig that out and send it to you, and none of them somehow ever seem to be able to do that. But it really is in the mid-90s that it becomes declassified, that people start to learn about it. And look, funny story, people will sometimes say to me, introduce me and say, and Rick Beyer, who discovered the Ghost Army. I'm going to tell you, Rick Beyer, when he started working on the Ghost Army, there were 3 books out about it already. Okay? So other people had started to write about it. It's just that none of them had done particularly well. And I think that this is a story that really almost required the documentary film. You almost need to see these soldiers talking about it to kind of completely get it through your head that this really happened. So thank you so much. You're going to come up? Yeah. Thank you so much for having me here today. I so appreciate your being here. And whatever you want to say, you can say.
Okay, so to close quickly, we have good news, better news, and great news. The good news, which is why I drug my purse up here, is to thank Kurt Witcher for hosting us tonight. We are giving you Ghost Peeps. That's the good news. Thank you very much, Kurt. We're grateful. The better news is that Rick and I and Bruce Haynes at the local PBS station put together in May of last year for Memorial Day Q&A, storytelling. He was on Zoom. I was in the studio over on Coliseum, and we put together this half an hour show about Bill Blass and his life and the Ghost Army. And Bruce Haynes submitted that a few months ago, earlier this year, for an Emmy, and we won an Emmy Award for that film. Yeah, so He doesn't need Ben Affleck. He has us, and we have an Emmy. Yeah, okay. The great news is that our gift to you tonight is that Bill Blass Legacy has purchased 20 books, 20 of the Ghost Army books, and if you'd like Rick to sign it, they're your gift from us to you for being part of this tonight. So with that, we've concluded.
Well, I'm going to, don't go away. I'm going to add that I can count, and there's about 40 people here tonight.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm going to ask you to self-select that we don't want to do more than one book per family, and if we do that, we'll probably get through just fine. And I know some of you already have it. You don't get a book, Brian.
If we run out, we'll take your name.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, there we
Okay.
go. Okay.
I'll see you outside. I'll be out there in a moment.
Thank you.
Production facilities provided by Access Fort Wayne. Learn more under the Services tab at acpl.info.